Thanks, Fiona. Hi, everyone. This is Jen Andrews, and I'll apologize for the next 30 minutes. I have the privilege of kind of facilitating our first round of presentations, which is wonderful. I can't turn my camera on, so I apologize that I will be a disembodied voice. But I'm excited to start this round of presentations off with our first 7 fellows talking about their work. A note about process or structure before we get started. The fellows have all prepared incredibly condensed and rich presentations of only 3 minutes each. And so we will hear their presentations, then we will allow up to only a minute for very brief clarifying questions. And then we will take a minute to everybody offer questions, resources, thoughts, reflections on a Jamboard slide, a little Google slide that Kendall will put a link to right there. And then we'll move on to the next presentation. So everyone will only have 5 minutes, which seems like much too short to hear about all of the great work, except that that's intentional, and that our hope is that today is an opportunity to start conversations and make connections around what we're learning, around our challenges, and around our impacts. So the idea is for these midterms that the fellows hear about maybe resources that you're aware of that could help them, that they get the benefit of your kind of questions and perspective about their work, that they get to hear about work you're familiar with that relates to their work, but that they're offered that, in writing, and then they can follow up with you after the fact. We can follow up with them. So that's our, that'll be our kind of process and intent. I just want to thank you all in advance for your engagement with all of these wonderful fellows and wonderful presentations. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to our first presenter, Flom Hardy, who is working with Root Capital this summer. Flom, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Jennifer. So it is no secret that the way we grow our food today can have a damaging impact on the health of the environment and of people, but it can also be a solution to mitigating and adapting to climate change. My work this summer is exploring precisely this dynamic. Root Capital is an international nonprofit that invests in the growth of agricultural enterprises that support smallholder farmers in Latin America, Africa, and Southeast Asia. As part of their climate resilience initiative, I have been doing research and analysis to understand the extent to which businesses in their portfolio are using natural climate solutions like agroforestry and intercropping, and what their potential carbon benefits may be. Next slide. I've spent the last few weeks examining 22 surveys of coffee clients in Central America. These are surveys of 400 to 1,000 questions in Spanish that our clients ask their farmers every 1 to 2 years for certification purposes. You can see an example of a survey on the left and the types of practices I looked at on the right. I found that our clients are asking their farmers more than 350 different questions about climate-friendly agricultural practices. We are able to access this data because of a broader initiative to leverage digital technology for smallholder farmers. This is actually the first time that this data is being used to complement the climate resilience goals of Root Capital's lending program. It's exciting to think about how many different analyses could take place in the years to come to help support various mitigation and adaptation projects. Next slide. The first challenge has been around scaling the data processing and management to fit our timeline and needs. The surveys were much longer than expected, and it was difficult to figure out if we wanted to prioritize zooming into a specific practice area, like fertilizer use, for example, and address it thoroughly, or to zoom out and address questions on a variety of topics for this analysis. In addition, this is the first time this process is happening internally. I'm learning to navigate my own understanding of my capacities working within a new organization, with figuring out when my mentors are looking at me to suggest a strategy. Next slide. Equity has always been at the core of Root Capital's lending portfolio. The organization works with smallholder farmers who did not cause climate change and have been focused on supporting these farmers' adaptation needs as opposed to demanding evidence of their mitigation strategies. Through Root Capital's loans, businesses are able to expand their impact and support smallholder farmers' access to markets and equitable prices. In fact, like you can see on this map, most of their clients operate in areas where income is typically less than $5.50 per person per day. On an internal level, it is a challenge to navigate US-centric social justice issues within an international organization. How do we both prioritize education and awareness for staff, while also understanding that there are 130 staff members within 6 countries navigating their own unique issues related to class, racism, and inequality within their office and broader cultures? In closing, I'm proud to be working on a project supporting rural businesses as they confront the climate crisis, and look forward to the rest of my analysis this summer. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mom. So interesting. So 2 things. One is we have time for a couple of brief questions, more kind of clarifying questions than discussion questions. So if anyone has questions or comments, please feel free to put them in the chat, yeah, put them in the chat. I think that's the best way to do it. And then we also want you to navigate over to that Jamboard link that Kendall put in the chat, and feel free to, there's instructions on that first slide, and then Flom's slide is the second one. So feel free to post, again, reflection questions, resources that you think might be interesting relative to her project, things that came up for you as you were hearing her presentation. Anybody have any questions, clarifying questions for Flom to start with?
Hey, Flom, I'm just wondering if you might reflect upon the focus area, which is obviously the tropics, and if that seems to really make sense in terms of Root Capital's broader missions.
Yes, I definitely think it does. Most of the clients that their lending portfolio work in coffee, and so within the tropics, and so that's really where their focus area is. And so most of their clients are in coffee and cocoa.
Thank you.
Thank you. Time for 1 or 2 more for Flom, mentors or fellows. Oh, sorry, y'all.
So this is Todd Selig in Durham. I just had a question where this is a really unique project because it's looking at occurrences not only in New Hampshire, but around the world. And I'm just wondering if there are cultural or language or other issues that arise when you're trying to set a common standard across communities that are so different.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think there are a lot of challenges, different language challenges, then different types of Spanish in different regions, different sort of certification programs per region. And so as a result, Root Capital has staff and consultants that work in sort of all of these different regions. And then at the same time, there are sort of specific practices related to sort of how you grow coffee in a certain type of climate that end up being similar even in different countries. And so there's both, a lot of differences and overlaps at the same time that allow kind of Root Capital to do this sort of work and me to do this analysis.
Thank you, Flom. And Todd, thank you for the great question. I'm seeing that maybe we're having some technical issues with the Jamboard. So for now, what we'll do is go ahead and just use the chat for questions and comments while we're working it out. Sorry about that, y'all. And I do see there are some questions in the chat. So unfortunately, that's all we have time for, but we'll make sure to save questions and comments that you all put in the chat for Flom to follow up on after the fact. And for now, I'm afraid it's time to move on already to our second presentation. So great work, Flom. Thank you. Can't wait to hear more about how things have come to fruition for you and your work at the end of the summer. So next up, we have Lila Nelson, who's working with Brittany Angelo at Revision Energy. Lila.
Hi, everybody. My name is Lila, and this summer I'm working with Revision Energy. which is a solar company that works across New England to educate the public and make solar energy more simple and attainable. So I'm working to develop lesson plans to take across New England in a tiny home that's going to be completely powered by clean energy, along with their cute little mascot, Sun Squatch. And the plans will be used to teach students and adults alike throughout the community on how to live a more sustainable life. Next, please. So I've learned a ton so far, specifically all of the details of what solar power is, what the installation process is, the benefits of solar, and I knew a little bit about it going into it, but not nearly as much as I've learned now. And this really cool picture on the right actually shows one of the fun facts that I've learned, and it shows how great the benefits and how much solar power we actually have compared to all of the other renewable and non-renewable materials alike. And then I've also been learning about the different ways that Revision has already implemented education into their current mission statement. Next, please. So for challenges, of course, I've faced the challenge that everybody else has of having to work remote. But on top of that, I have been dealing with how exactly I'm actually going to make an impact with this project, because of course that's the goal, the final goal, to make a real impact. So that's split into two categories as to how we're going to teach this, whether that be through webinars, Q&A sessions, videos, teaching in person, stuff like that. But then that also goes hand in hand with who are we teaching this to? And how can I make this have the greatest impact? And how can we make these lessons more approachable to the entire community? Next, please. As for social justice, clean energy and solar power has kind of always been in the past more accessible to more affluent communities. And Revision is working to teach everybody about clean energy, especially as it becomes more accessible and affordable. But they're also working on installing solar in more unconventional locations. So as you can see in these two pictures, they are installing solar on apartment complexes that landlords can buy into, but then also off-site solar and land leasing in agricultural fields, which is a great economic opportunity. I'm looking forward to continuing to learn and show my knowledge in the final lesson plans. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Lila. It's very, sorry, excuse me. It's such cool work. You have a question in the chat from Cameron about, are you considering highly engaged lesson plans with activities for the students? How do you imagine this working?
Yeah, so the lesson plans that I've already come up with, we have a couple activity ideas, and that's something that they've already taken to schools. So like solar printing is an idea that they've already done, where students go and they learn a little bit and then they get to do a fun activity. And I think especially for the younger age groups, that'll keep their attention and will teach them more than just a simple lecture.
Yeah, so it sounds like it will be interactive. You've got a whole slew of additional questions you could choose from here in the chat around how is environmental justice being integrated, or here's a kind of short clarifying one. What lessons will take place in the classroom? Will the lessons take place in the classroom or in more informal settings? Is this intended to be straight curriculum or more kind of co-curricular?
So I think we're going to aim for a little bit of both, as in we will upload these lesson plans online that teachers can maybe teach to their students on their own, but then also taking the tiny home to schools and being able to teach the lesson from the home.
Great. So again, pretty flexible. Yeah. You probably got time briefly to speak to one more, the role that Revision sees this campaign in advancing their business model and growth.
Yeah, I mean, education has always been important to them. And so I think this just furthers that growth and allows like a greater reach of all of the information. And so I think just making it more accessible to as many people as possible is what they're going for. And currently they don't necessarily have like this specific project already in place. So that was kind of my job, to make a real project that they know will then help them in the future, especially to get more leads, whether that be through students telling their parents or taking this to a community center and people in the community learning about them.
Making it visible and accessible in many places. That sounds great. And you've got a lot of questions and conversation to follow up on in the chat, Lila. Thank you very much for this work and presentation. I'm afraid we have to move on already, but feel free to follow up with the chat. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next up, we have Maggie Peard, who's working with Abby Sherwin at the Southern Maine Planning and Development Commission. So Maggie, the floor is yours.
Great, thank you. Hi everyone, I'm Maggie Peard and I'm working with the Southern Maine Planning and Development Commission, which serves 39 towns in Southern Maine. Climate change is already threatening these Maine communities by bringing higher temperatures, rising seas, and more severe storms. SMPDC recognizes this threat and has embarked on a 2-year project to create a coastal resilience plan for its 10 coastal communities from Kittery to just south of Portland. While climate change is a global issue, its effects are felt at the local level, requiring local expertise to identify especially vulnerable areas. So my role this summer is to tap into that local expertise by engaging municipal staff, land trusts, and nonprofits in the planning process. I'm assisting with a survey, interviewing key stakeholders, and planning for ongoing engagement for the project. You can go to the next slide. So to end on a more positive note, I'm going to start with some of the challenges of this kind of project and end with some learnings that may help to overcome those challenges. So the first is Maine is a home rule state, which means that each municipality has a great deal of autonomy in its own governance. And while this can be an asset for towns seeking to go above and beyond state sustainability standards, it also places the burden on municipalities that often don't have the capacity to take on additional sustainability initiatives as much as they might want to. So that really takes me to my next challenge, which is the limited capacity of small municipalities. In the interviews I've conducted so far, town staff recognize the importance of planning for climate hazards, but often just don't have the bandwidth to take it on within their limited staff. And most small towns don't have the budget to be able to hire a sustainability coordinator or somebody who can be looking at these full time. Next slide. So given those challenges, this project has really shown me the power of taking a regional approach to climate change. For one thing, climate change doesn't care about where town boundaries fall. These issues affect all of the coastal towns, and how one town chooses to respond will affect the next town over. So there needs to be the ability to zoom out and look at the bigger picture. A regional plan can also reduce the feeling that any one town is kind of going it alone. One of the people I interviewed talked about how it would feel a lot easier to propose a new coastal resilience ordinance to her town council if she could say that all of the surrounding towns were proposing the same thing. Also, a regional approach eliminates the need for each town to recreate the wheel. This project can create a platform for municipalities and land trusts to share information and best practices for adapting to sea level rise, and shift some of the work to a regional organization like SMPDC. And it really highlights the importance of investing in capacity building in regional entities in order to maximize that impact. And then finally, on a personal level, I've learned a lot about the dynamics that seem to exist somewhere between competition and collaboration between neighboring towns. I've mainly worked on climate action projects for one city at a time in the past, so working at a more regional scale has me thinking about how to best leverage or manage some of those dynamics. Next slide. Lastly, an exciting aspect of this fellowship for me has been thinking about ways to move the stakeholder engagement beyond some of the usual suspects. So I'm working on scoping out a youth focus group to pull in the voices of the next generation who will be even more affected by inaction on climate preparedness. Overall, the fellowship has been a really great experience, and I'm excited to have some more concrete findings from both surveys and interviews to share with you all by the end of the summer. Thanks.
Thanks, Maggie. I love the observation about the dynamic, the sort of friendly, competitive, collaborative dynamic. I think that shows up a lot and can be really fantastic, actually, in lots of ways.
Definitely.
So time for a couple questions. And again, I don't know if you all saw in the chat, the Jamboard should now work. So feel free to put links to resources, questions, or comments on the Jamboard for everybody too, so they have them kind of moving forward, captured in a way that's immediately accessible. In the meantime, Maggie, a question about our Southern Maine youth interested in the regional approach, our youth.
I guess my answer would be I hope so. We're kind of in that initial phase of figuring out kind of what groups we might be able to work with to connect with youth. But there's definitely a decent number of like high school environmental clubs. And there's a big new initiative called the Kenny Bunkport Climate Initiative that's engaging youth about climate change. So there definitely seems to be interest as a whole, and hopefully interest in engaging with this project.
Thank you. One more, whoops, sorry. Will they use the results of this survey of the richest part of the state to help other Maine development commissions? So how does this translate briefly?
Yeah, I mean, I think that part of the reason that these 10 towns were chosen was like their similarity of being like sandy beaches. And so I think part of it will be more specific to that kind of geography. But I think a lot of things like the ordinances and other proposals that come out of it could certainly be leveraged by other regions of the state as well.
Thank you. I do love that. That is a really interesting observation about not only kind of demographics, but resources and how transferable things are depending on, you know, place-based context. I wish we had more time to keep talking about this, but please everybody continue to follow up, offering comments and questions in the chat. Maggie, lots for you to engage with there. We're going to move on to our next presenter. And again on the Jamboard too. Our next presenter is Yadira Hernandez Plasencia, who's working with Unitil, Kristen Osterwood and Sarah Sankwich. Yadira, over to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. My name is Yadira Hernandez. I'm the Sustainability Fellow with Unitil this summer, and I am responsible of researching, finding ESG-related programs that can increase Unitil's transparency and their accountability as an energy company to communicate their sustainability efforts, whether it's to customers, investors, or stakeholders. Next slide, please. So as you can see on your screen, there can be plenty of programs to learn from. It could be recommendations, it can be commitments, it can be certifications, ranking, you name it. And it's my responsibility to get to know these programs, know what they involve, and recommend some of these programs for Unitil to one day adopt and implement. One of the, let's say the one on your bottom screen, the TCFD, is one of the programs that I'm recommending this summer that involves, say, when climate-related issues comes about, how does that impact a company in their financial performance? Next slide, please. A few of the challenges that I've come across when researching each of my programs is that there's no one single perfect program out there, right? So it takes time, it takes a commitment, and also it takes a team to make these programs a reality for each company. And it depends on the priority of each one, the deadlines, and sorting those out on what data and what metrics is necessary to report to each of these programs. Another one I would say is juggling between the data and the results of the timeline. So let's say one program requires, let's say, surface level information that can easily be extracted and placed into and reported, and it can be done within months, versus one program that needs more of an infrastructural change and requiring information from many outlets of the company itself, which can involve up to years, say. Next slide, please. And finally, I wanted to highlight from the beginning of my fellowship, I noticed a very, very remarkable front on the sustainability with Unitil. It can involve an increase of diversity, equity, and inclusion trainings as a first time this summer for as a company-wide offering of events as well. And one thing I wanted to highlight is that publicly this summer, Unitil has committed to reduce to 50% of their greenhouse gases by 2030, and by 2050, go net zero. And I thought that was pretty remarkable to share. I'm ready for my next steps and reporting programs, and thank you so much.
Thank you, Yadira. And that is remarkable. I was excited when I saw that news come through a couple of weeks ago. Congrats to everybody at Unitil, and kudos to everybody at Unitil. You got a question in the chat about from Kate at Prime Buckholz, who says, as you indicate, one of the largest challenges in sustainability is just the array of metrics, the variety of metrics and frameworks. So it's been encouraging to see some collaboration between them. Do you have any learnings from that collaboration and crossover?
If I may ask further, what type of collaboration crossover with mentors with Unitil or programs with Unitil?
Thanks,
I think it's
Yadira.
about, go ahead,
It's
sorry.
about the framework. So for example, I know SASB and IIRC came together for the Value Reporting Foundation, and they're going to be working with CDP and others. And it seems like that's a huge step forward just in terms of finding the, cross collaboration, but didn't know if you had run into any benefits of that or challenges.
Oh yeah, that only helps when programs themselves collaborate. Me and my mentors actually talked about the International Integrated Reporting Council. So, the Value Reporting Foundation, which, two have collaborated, that can only help the process, right? It can only make things simpler, not so many puzzles. This puzzle can help you with many other ones. So yes, I hope that answered your question.
Time for one more, if anyone's got one more. All right, we'll let people noodle on it. Okay, is Unitil looking at evaluation systems as a mean of creating and tracking performance improvement goals, or is it more about engagement and communication?
I would say it's a mixture of both. Yeah, I think Sarah's coming in here.
Both and?
I want to say both. It's a mixture, because at the end of my tracking and reporting, knowing which programs, I'm going to have to translate it, right? With anything that comes around with data, you got to translate it so it can make sense for to communicate to the public. So I want to say it's a little bit of both.
Thanks for that. Unfortunately, time to move on, but please you all continue to provide Yadira with ideas and comments and resources in the Jamboard. We're going to go to our next presenter. Kendall, do you mind? Thank you. So our next presenter is Hannah Lyons-Cabezas, who is working with the town of Concord, Mass. Hannah.
Thanks, Jen. Hi, everyone. I'm Hannah. I'm the Financing, Energy Efficiency, and Electrification Fellow with Concord this summer. I've been conducting research and in-depth stakeholder interviews to work on compiling a report of barriers to greater energy efficiency adoption and potential creative financing models that we think could facilitate the greater uptake of energy efficiency upgrades in residential homes. Next slide, please. So thus far, we've realized, or at least I've realized, that effective communication and marketing is crucial. This probably seems relatively obvious for any sort of outreach program, but a lot of what we're looking at is different types of loan programs and repayment options. And home remodeling and construction and financing as separate entities are all really complicated and can be confusing. And so information being inaccessible and also not being incredibly evident as available programming has been something that we've realized we need to work on. A lot of people don't know the financing options that Concord currently offers. It has some rebate programs, but unless people are actively looking into this themselves, we're not sure that it's as widely marketed as it should be. So that's something that we want to work on. And another thing that's come up that's been really interesting considering the scope of my project initially had only to do with financing is that we don't think upfront costs of these energy efficiency improvements is the primary issue that's keeping people from performing them in their homes. Based on interviews with residents who've chosen not to have some of these improvements done or have had some issues with them, a lot of the barriers are aesthetic. People don't like how, say, heat pumps look in their homes, or some of the outdoor units have to be maintained and they're inconvenient. People find their home audit process confusing, and then when they get the reports back, they don't really know what to do with them. We've kind of been having to expand the scope of the project, and that has been a little challenging, which leads into my next slide, which is challenges. So we've found the fact that these non-financial barriers are more significant than we thought to be a little bit tricky. It's meant that the scope of my project and research has had to shift and expand in ways that we didn't initially expect. So that's required a little bit of adaptation. And another challenge has been that Concord has a public utility, which is helpful in some aspects because obviously it's much easier to align a public utility's goals with energy efficiency goals than a private utility that is much more concerned with profit. But there are a lot of legal restrictions surrounding how public utilities use ratepayer money. So we're realizing if we want to set up some kind of loan program, we're probably going to need third-party involvement, and that combined with stakeholders from the utility and from the town government and stuff just makes the project a little more complicated. So those are some things that we've been navigating. Next slide, please. And while it's interesting that Concord is a relatively, I think, affluent and lucky population and isn't facing as many financial restrictions to these types of upgrades as other communities do, I think that the financing models that we're investigating and the lessons that we're learning can really be applicable across income levels. And anything that we can do to expand these kinds of programs is going to make energy efficiency upgrades more affordable and more accessible, which means that there's going to be increased access for lower income populations eventually as people are able to scale these kinds of financing models. And we're hoping that having this more available is eventually going to help reduce the disproportionate energy burdens that low income populations often face. Thank you.
Thanks, Hannah. A really lot to think about, and I think your challenges will resonate. Time for just one question, and so that is, you've got one from Fina. Are there other social services available to collaborate with so you aren't experiencing scope creep and trying to solve all the problems?
I'm not totally sure what you mean by social services. Do you mean by like other public stakeholders? Just to clarify what the question's asking. Other public stakeholders. Yeah, I think that it's helpful that I'm collaborating with representatives from volunteer boards and advisory boards from the town itself, and then with stakeholders in the utility, because we think that whatever program we end up going with is going to require like very extensive multi-stakeholder collaboration. So we've found that it's helpful to be getting inputs from all of those folks, and that's helped to shape and restrain the program, understanding the constraints that each of those stakeholders is operating under. So that can be helpful, yeah.
Thank you, Hannah. Again, if you have more for Hannah, please share it in the Jamboard. Unfortunately, we have to keep moving through here. 2 more presentations in this round before we take a quick break. Thanks so much, Hannah. So our next presentation will be from Kat Morris, who's working with Jeff Cohen at the US EPA. Kat.
Hello. Hi, thank you all for being here. So yes, my name is Kat Morris, and I'm working with the US Environmental Protection Agency. Very specifically, I'm working with the Stakeholder Engagement Branch, which is tasked with developing outreach strategies for environmental justice organizations, federally recognized tribes, and environmental NGOs. Even more specifically, I'm working with the under the Toxic Substance and Control Act within the Office of Pollution Prevention and Toxics and our lead program. The point of which is to really establish the fact that those closest to the problem are closest to the solution. Therefore, meaningful engagement is essential for developing just sustainability and environmentalism. pictured, you'll see the map of the various regions. So there are a few different communities in different regions within the EPA that I will be working with across the country. Next slide, please. Thank you. So one thing I've been learning is that the question of how the EPA can increase use of resources and programs throughout the country in environmental justice communities starts with making internal changes for how various branches through the EPA view their work and to highlight the intersectoral nature of environmental justice. So this is a graphic that I made with respect to a National Lead Prevention Week that'll happen in October, really highlighting the fact that lead exposure prevention is very much an environmental justice process as much as it is straightforward to lead, as well as tribal affairs and pollution prevention and so on and so forth. Next slide, please. Some challenges that I've had kind of in this work and doing something that might be considered innovative is the fact that making progress often requires changing the process. And since the EPA is a federal organization, there's very much a long instituted bureaucracy, which can serve as a barrier and slow down the process of kind of conducting the types of outreach methods that might facilitate connections sooner. However, once that red tape is cut and crossed, there's a lot more room for collaboration and innovation that will provide new insights in a way that was not able to be gathered prior. Next slide, please. So ultimately, environmental justice is social justice, right? And so with my work, I'm conducting research and outreach to environmental justice stakeholders for their insights in order to formally recommend to the EPA and to the various branches what type of institutional and programmatic changes can be made to ensure that community members are having their needs met. And to do this in a way that facilitates proper collaboration with these communities is essential to ensure that this outreach is meaningful and intentional rather than a performative act of tokenization or checking off a box to say that we did this and we made that contact. I love the idea of collaborative governance because it moves from having people or the EPA or federal government in general instituting changes upon people, and it transitions into a collaborative solution development that is necessary for the future of sustainability. Thank you. I might have gone too fast, but here we are.
Well, you did not go too fast. It's so much to think about and such useful and interesting. So many useful and interesting reflections. So thank you. We have time briefly for, we'll just do this first question here. Have you also experienced political challenges or interference with what you're trying to do?
Nope, not yet. Not at all. I hope not, but you know, if it happens, I'll let you know.
That's good news. Very glad to hear it. You got a couple other questions from Meg and Jill that I'll encourage you to follow up on after the fact, and maybe we can come back to them in the discussion as well.
Oh, okay, I just don't know what CAGs are, so sorry.
Meg, CAGs, or maybe put it in the chat, please.
Community advisory groups on, yeah, I'll link it.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Wonderful. All right, well, look forward to continuing this, to coming back to this. For now, we're going to move on to Alex Ramey, our final presenter in this round. Alex is working with the Northern Forest Center. Alex, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Jennifer. So as you just heard, my name is Alex. I'm working with Mike and Maura at the Northern Forest Center on sustainable rural destination development. To start off, just to give you a little context, the Northern Forest region consists of about 30 million acres of forest spanning Maine, New Hampshire, Vermont, and New York. The Northern Forest Center supports all kinds of economic and community development projects in this region. One area of focus for them, among many, is destination development. As you can imagine, this stunning landscape has become an increasingly popular spot for outdoor and tourism. My role this summer focuses on how to integrate those activities into the forest economy sustainably. Next slide. I'm learning a lot from this fellowship, but I will condense it down to just a few things here. So these days, many rural communities are turning toward tourism as a sustainable development strategy. It has the obvious benefits of bringing in jobs and revenue, celebrating local heritage, and even incentivizing conservation. But how do we make sure tourism doesn't degrade those natural resources or damage quality of life for local communities? Destination management is an approach to tourism that focuses on preventing and mitigating those impacts. One management tactic other destinations have used is just asking resource users to sign a sustainability pledge. Basically, the pledge is a tool for communicating how to behave responsibly and respectfully in a destination. And that applies not to just people from away, but also creates a set of shared norms and values among locals. The center has coordinated 2 pledge programs in the region, which I get to help promote and evaluate this summer. These are the Mahuzik Way Embrace Our Place Pledge and Ride with Gratitude. Right now, I'm designing some tailored surveys that will go out to local stakeholders as well as pledge takers to understand the pledge's impact.
We just did was a utility, we directed a utility investment.
I'm also conducting,
the
can we,
charging
for just a
structure.
second?
Yeah, I'd say pause. Let's figure out how to mute that.
And that can be great too, but I know the cost.
Kendall, can you see who's, okay, or Michelle, thank you.
Thank
Go
you.
ahead.
Sorry about that. Okay. So like I said, right now I'm designing some tailored surveys that will go out to local stakeholders as well as pledge takers to understand the impact of the pledge. And I'm also conducting case study research into how other rural communities handle destination development. Next slide. Now, there are 2 major challenges I've encountered as I conduct my research. The first challenge is assessing the impact of the pledges. At the moment, there isn't an existing system in place for measuring impact and change in behavior over time. But that's okay, because I see this as a really cool opportunity to think through what metrics and impacts matter to the center and its pledge partners. The other challenge is that there aren't many rural destinations out there who have already moved from promoting tourism to destination management. So there isn't a playbook already out there for Northern Forest communities. On a positive note, that means the center gets to be a leader in this realm of thought. When we meet again for our final presentation, I'm hoping to present a set of recommendations for how the center can do just that in the future. Next slide. Now, before I close, I want to leave you all with a question that I'm still thinking through. Sustainability calls on us to be systems thinkers and to understand how actions like environmental protection can affect the economy and communities. My question for you is, how can we manage tourism to rural destinations so that it protects nature and local residents, but still ensure that travel and outdoor recreation, which I've heard before we all love, are accessible to all? This is just something to think about and a theme I also hope to touch on in my final presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. Such a great question for all of us to think about. And I love your reframing of those challenges as opportunities to work with. Does anybody have any comments or, oh yeah, okay, so a few questions. So one from Yadira, is it required to take the pledge in order to visit or tour the landscape?
That is a great question. And the answer shortly, I guess, is no, it's not required. It's completely voluntary, both for locals and for visitors. And I think that unlike somewhere like an island nation where it is really easy to fly in and on your flight, you have to take the pledge to go there, there's really no control over who visits. It's even hard to define who a visitor is versus somebody who's local and just kind of traveling close locally. So short answer is no, not required.
One more for now, and that is, are there other fields you're exploring outside of hospitality that manage pledges?
Outside of hospitality pledges? No, actually, that is a really great question and something I haven't thought about. I've been looking into sustainability pledges in different places of the world, mostly that have to do with travel, but no, I hadn't thought about other kinds of pledge programs.
Awesome. Well, food for thought then. If folks know of any, put them out there. Throw them on the jam board for Alex. Alex, I think you've got a few other things to follow up on in the chat and on the in the Jamboard as well. So thank you for that excellent presentation, and a big thank you to all of our first round presenters for your wonderful work this summer and for doing such a great job and sharing it with us.